Good morning, and welcome back to reading Pride and Prejudice. No, I'm not reading Pride and Prejudice anymore. I finished it. I'm reading Sense and Sensibility. I just have said it so much that I'm back in Sense and Sensibility brain, but we are reading Sense and Sensibility, not Pride and Prejudice. I am on 100% disability from work right now, and this is my therapy. So I will continue on reading to YouTube. And this is part of my therapy. So I'm happy to continue on and slow things down and just read and look up words that I don't know and try to understand this world. And that's what we're going to do. So we're in chapter 8. We've finally moved out of that horrible house where our freaking stepson and Fanny have taken over and said, actually, I know you're a widow and you have 3 daughters who won't inherit anything, but I might actually need to borrow money from you guys because this house, expenses, bills are piling up. And so we moved out and we met John Middleton and his wife. They're fun, and they're kind of fun and kooky. And then Mrs. Jennings, John Middleton's wife's mom, is also very fun and curt, which I do like. I do like that. So we're in chapter 8. Mrs. Jennings is Mrs. Middleton's mom. Am I saying Middleton? Yeah, Middleton. Lady Middleton's mother, Mrs. Jennings. Mrs. Jennings was a widow. We have things in common. 2 people have things in common. Mrs. Jennings was a widow with an ample jointure. There's a little teeny tiny one next to that word, and I can't remember where I'm supposed to find that, probably in the back, but I don't know what that means already on the first sentence. We're going to look it up real quick. What is a jointure? Definition. An estate settled on a wife for a period during which she survives her husband in lien of a dower. Okay. No dower. She got a jointure. Okay. With an ample jointure. She had only 2 daughters, both of whom she had lived to see respectably married, and she had now therefore nothing to do but to marry all the rest of the world. What a time in life. In the promotion of this object, she was zealously active. As far as her ability reached, and missed no opportunity of projecting weddings among all the young people of her acquaintance. This is where she got the idea of Emma, probably. She was remarkably quick in the discovery of attachments, and had enjoyed the advantage of raising the blushes and the vanity of many a young lady by insinuations of her power over such a young man. And this kind of discernment enabled her, soon after her arrival at Barton, decisively to pronounce that Colonel Brandon was very much in love with the youngest, Marianne Dashwood. This is a fun little gabby little old lady. I love that. Zealously, actively marrying the rest of the world. A little matchmaker. That's fun. She rather suspected it to be so on the very first evening of their being together, from his listening so attentively while she sang to them. And when the visit was returned by the Middletons dining at the cottage, the fact was ascertained by his listening to her again. It must be so. She was perfectly convinced of it. It would be an excellent match, for he was rich and she was handsome. Kate Winslet. Mrs. Jennings had been anxious to see Colonel Brandon well married ever since her connection with Sir John first brought him to her knowledge, and she was always anxious to get a good husband for every pretty girl. This is a fun character, Mrs. Jennings. The immediate advantage to herself was by no means inconsiderable. for it supplied her with endless jokes against them both. Challenge. She's very determined and loves a challenge. At the park, she laughed at the Colonel, and in the cottage at Marianne. To the former, her raillery was probably, I had learned that word last time. To the former, her raillery was probably, as far as it regarded only himself, perfectly indifferent. But to the latter, it was at first incomprehensible. And when its object was understood, she hardly knew whether most to laugh at its absurdity or censure its impertinence, for she considered it as an unfeeling reflection of the Colonel's advanced years. He's 35. I'm be 40 this year. And on his forlorn condition as an old bachelor. My God. Mrs. Dashwood, who could not think a man 5 years younger than herself so exceedingly ancient as he appeared to the youthful fancy of her daughter, ventured to clear Mrs. Jennings from the probability of wishing to throw ridicule on his age. But at least, Mamma, you cannot deny the absurdity of the accusation. Though you may not think it intentionally ill-natured, Colonel Brandon is certainly younger than Mrs. Jennings, but he is old enough to be my father. Is that true? I guess so, if he had you at 15. Okay. And if he were ever animated enough to be in love, she loves an animated man. Must have long outlived every sensation of the kind. It is too ridiculous. When a man is to be safe from such wit, of age and infirmary will not protect him. When is a man to be safe from such wit if age and infirmary will not protect him? Infirmity. Like the like infirm. Like knocking on devil's door. Physical or mental weakness? Okay, that's what I thought, but like infirm, he's 35. This is making me feel so old. Okay, whatever. Infirmity, said Eleanor. Do you call Colonel Brandon infirm? I can easily suppose that his age may appear much greater to you than to my mother, but you can hardly deceive yourself as to his having the use of his limbs. Right. Did you hear him complaining of the rheumatism? And is not that the commonest infirmity of declining life? My dearest child, said her mother, laughing, at this rate you must be in continual terror of my decay, and it must seem to you a miracle that my life has been extended to the advanced age of 40. Yeah, right. Like when you're young, you're like, God, you're freaking old. And then when you get to be 40, you're like, I'm still young. It's crazy. It really is crazy. It feels crazy. Mamma, you are not doing me justice. I know very well that Colonel Brandon is not old enough to make friends, yet apprehensive of losing him in the course of nature. He may live 20 years longer, but 35 has nothing to do with matrimony. Perhaps, said Eleanor, 35 and 17 had better not have anything to do with matrimony together, but if there should be any chance happen to be a woman who is single at 27, I should not think Colonel Brandon's being 35 any objection to his marrying her. A woman of 27, said Marianne after pausing a moment, can never hope to feel or inspire affection again. And if her home be uncomfortable, or her fortune small, I can suppose that she might bring herself to submit to the offices of a nurse, for the sake of the provision and security of a wife. In his marrying such a woman, therefore, there would be nothing unsuitable. It would be a compact of convenience, and the world would be satisfied. In my eyes, it would be no marriage at all, but that would be nothing. To me, it would seem only commercial exchange, in which each wished to be benefited at the expense of the other. It's like a conditional thing, like, you're going to take care of me. It would be impossible, I know, replied Eleanor, to convince you that a woman of 27 could feel for a man of 35 anything near enough to love to make him a desirable companion to her. But I must object to your dooming Colonel Brandon and his wife to the constant confinement of a sick chamber, merely because he He chanced to complain yesterday, a very cold, damp day, of a slight rheumatic feel in one of his shoulders. But he talked of flannel waistcoats, said Marianne. And with me, a flannel waistcoat is invariably connected with aches, cramps, rheumatism, and every species of ailment that can afflict the old and the feeble. This is a fun chapter. Had he only been in a violent fever, you would not have despised him half so much. Confess, Marianne, is not there something interesting to you in the flushed cheeks, hollow eye, and quick pulse of a fever? Yeah. It means that he's really feeling something, and you must love that. Soon after this, upon Eleanor's leaving the room, Mamma, said Marianne, I have an alarm on the subject of illness, which I cannot conceal from you. I am not sure Edward Ferrars is not well. I am sure Edward Ferrars is not well. We have now been here almost a fortnight, and yet he does not come. Nothing but real indisposition could occasion this extraordinary delay. What else can detain him at Norland? Had you any idea of his coming so soon? Said Miss Dashwood. I had none. On the contrary, if I have felt any anxiety at all on the subject, it has been in recollecting that he sometimes showed a want of pleasure and readiness in accepting my invitation when I talked to him of his coming to Barton. Does Eleanor expect him already? I've never mentioned it to her, but of course she must. I rather think you are mistaken, for when I was talking to her yesterday, of getting a new grate for the spare bedchamber, she observed that there was no immediate hurry for it, and it was not likely that the room should be wanted for some time. How strange this is! What can be the meaning of it? But the whole of their behaviour to each other has been unaccountable. How cold, how composed were their last to-dos! How languid their conversation the last evening of their being together! In Edward's farewell there was no distinction between Eleanor and me. It was the good wishes of an affectionate brother to both. Twice did I leave them purposely together in the course of the last morning, and each time did he most unaccountably follow me out of the room, and Eleanor, on quitting Norland and Edward, cried not as I did. Even now her self-command is invariable. When is she dejected or melancholy? When does she try to avoid society or appear restless and dissatisfied in it? She wants everybody to feel everything all the time. And that is a lot, and I get that. I do get that. She wants people to be excited about it, but it's like, nobody's got time for all that. Nobody's got time for all that emotion. Like, we're going to move on with our lives, and we're moving into a new place, and everybody relax. This is a fun book so far for me. I know it was 5th on the list out of 6, but I'm stoked about it so far. Chapter 9. Let's read on. The Dashwoods were now settled at Barton, with tolerable comfort to themselves. The house and the garden, with all the objects surrounding them, were now become familiar. That's a nice feeling. And the ordinary pursuits which had given to Norland half its charm were engaged in again with far greater enjoyment than Norland had ever been able to afford since the loss of their father. Sir John Middleton, who called on them every day for the first fortnight, and who was not in the habit of seeing much occupation at home, could not conceal his amazement to find them always employed. He said, I know you guys are like poor women, but you guys are always up to something. And I can't be bothered to be at my house with 4 children and a wife, you know? I gotta be out doing stuff too. Their visitors, except those from Barton Park, were not many, for in spite of Sir John's urgent entreaties that they would mix more in the neighbourhood, and repeated assurances of his carriage being always at their service, the independence of Mrs. Dashwood's spirit overcame the wish of society for her children, and she was resolute in declining to visit any family beyond the distance of a walk. There were but few who could be so classed, and it was not all of them that were attainable. About 1.5 miles from the cottage, along the narrow winding valley of Allenham. You could just put a shire or a ham at the end of anything and it becomes a town or a city. And I like that. Just Emilyham. That would be my town. Emlishire. Which issued from that of Barton, as formerly described. The girls had, in one of their earliest walks, discovered an ancient, respectable-looking mansion, which, by reminding them a little of Norland, interested their imagination and made them wish to be better acquainted with it. Ooh. But they learnt, on inquiry, that its possessor, an elderly lady of very good character, was unfortunately too infirm to mix with the world and never stirred from home. How old was she? Like 28? She had rheumatoid arthritis and she was 28 years old and she was stuck in this big mansion. The whole country about them abounded in beautiful walks. I wonder if that's going to be like a common theme in her books, is like everybody loves a walk. We love to walk about the countryside. I mean, what else was there to do besides paint and draw and sew and whatever? You know, there's lots to do, but it's just like walks. I'm going to go on one today. I'm going to get my mind right and go on a walk today. Thanks, Jane Austen. The high downs, which invited them from almost every window of the cottage to seek the exquisite enjoyment of air on their summits, were unhappy. I love that she does Anne before an H, and we don't do that anymore, and it's so funny to read. Because everybody in school is like, that's not a thing anymore. Were an happy alternative with the dirt of the valleys beneath shut up their superior beauties. And towards one of these hills did Marianne and Margaret one memorable morning direct their steps, attracted by the partial sunshine of a showery sky, and unable longer to bear the confinement which the settled rain of the 2 preceding days had occasioned. Okay. The weather was not tempting enough to draw the 2 others from their pencil and their book, in spite of Marianne's declaration that the day would be lastingly fair, and that every threatening cloud would be drawn off from their hills, and the 2 girls set off together. They gaily ascended the downs, rejoicing in their own penetration at every glimpse of blue sky, and when they caught in their faces the animating gales of an high southwesterly wind, they pitied the fears which had prevented their mother and Eleanor from sharing such delightful sensations. "Is there a felicity in the world," said Marianne, "superior to this? Margaret, we will walk here at least 2 hours." Margaret agreed, and they pursued their way against the wind, resisting it with laughing delight, for about 20 minutes longer, when suddenly the clouds united over their heads, and a driving rain set full in their face. Chagrined and surprised, they were obliged, though unwillingly, to turn back, for no shelter was nearer than their own house. One consolation, however, remained for them, to which the exigence of the moment gave more than usual propriety. It was that of running, with all possible speed, down the steep side of the hill, which led immediately to their garden gate. Fun. You know what? I'm going to go do that today. I'm going to find a grassy hill and I'm going to run down it. That's fun. They set off. Marianne had at first the advantage, but a false step brought her suddenly to the ground. Ruh-roh. And Margaret, unable to stop herself to assist her, was involuntarily hurried along and reached the bottom in safety. She said, "I can't stop." A gentleman carrying a gun, with 2 pointers playing round him. Oh, dogs, pointers. Yeah. I was like, 2 pointers for 1 gun? Okay. Was passing the hill and within a few yards of Marianne when her accident happened. He put down his gun and ran to assistance. She had raised herself from the ground, but her foot had been twisted in the fall, and she was scarcely able to stand. The gentleman offered his services, and perceiving that her modesty declined what her situation rendered necessary, yeah. She said, "I'm usually not allowed to be touched, but I can't walk. And so I guess I'll be carried in your big, beefy arms." The gentleman offered his services, and perceiving that her modesty declined what her situation rendered necessary, took her up in his arms without farther delay, and carried her down the hill. Then, passing through the garden, the gate of which had been left open by Margaret, he bore her directly into the house, whither Margaret was just arrived, and quitted not his hold till he had seated her in the chair in the parlour. Eleanor and her mother rose up in amazement at their entrance, and while their eyes of both were fixed on him with an evident wonder and secret admiration which equally sprung from his appearance, he apologized for his intrusion by relating its cause, in a manner so frank and so graceful that his person, which was uncommonly handsome, received additional charms from his voice and expression. Wow. Not only did you carry my grown-ass sister into this house from this hill, and you're soaking wet because it is raining and that is hot. You are hot and you're handsome and you have a really nice voice and a beautiful expression. He's got a lot going for him. Had he been even old, ugly, and vulgar, the gratitude and kindness of Mrs. Dashwood would have been secured by an act of attention to her child. Oh, but the influence of youth, beauty, and elegance gave an interest to the action which came home to her feelings. She thanked him again and again, and with a sweetness of address which always attended her, invited him to be seated. But this he declined, and he was dirty and wet. Mrs. Dashwood then begged to know to whom she was obliged. His name, he replied, was Willoughby, and his present home was Allenham. Oh, Allenham. From whence he hoped she would allow him the honour of calling tomorrow to inquire after Miss Dashwood. The honour was readily granted, and he then departed to make himself still more interesting in the midst of a heavy rain. His manly beauty and more than common gracefulness were instantly the theme of general admiration, and the laugh which his gallantry raised against Marianne received particular spirit from his exterior attractions. Marianne herself had seen less of his person than the rest, for the confusion which crimsoned over her face on his lifting her up and had robbed her of the power of regarding him after their entering the house. But she had seen enough of him to join in all the admiration of the others, and with an energy which always adorned her praise. His person and air were equal to what her fancy had ever drawn for the hero of a favourite story. And in his carrying her into the house with so little previous formality, there was a rapidity of thought which particularly recommended to the action to her. Every circumstance belonging to him was interesting. That's my favorite word. Wow, interesting. That's funny. His name was good, Willoughby. His residence was in their favorite village, and she soon found out that all manly dresses, a shooting jacket was the most becoming. And pointers were my favorite dog. And shooting jackets and those boots are actually my favorite on a man's body. Her imagination was busy. Yeah. Her reflections were pleasant. And the pain of a sprained ankle was disregarded. Actually, I'm fine. I probably could have walked, but that was fun. Sir John called on them as soon as the next interval of fair weather that morning allowed him to get out of doors, and Marianne's accident being related to him, he was eagerly asked whether he knew any gentleman of the name Willoughby at Allenham. Willoughby? Cried Sir John. What, is he in the country? That is good news, however. I will ride over tomorrow and ask him to dinner on Thursday. You know him, then? Said Mrs. Dashwood. Know him? To be sure I do. Why, he is down here every year. And what sort of man is he? As good a kind fellow as ever lived, I assure you. A very decent shot, and there is not a bolder rider in England. And is that all you can say for him? Cried Marianne indignantly. But what are his manners on more intimate acquaintances? What his pursuits, his talents, and genius? Sir John was rather puzzled. Upon my soul, said he, I do not know much about him as to all that, but he is a pleasant, good-humoured fellow, and he's got the nicest little black bitch of a pointer I ever saw. Was she out with him today? That well-bred pointer. Ugh. But Marianne could do no more to satisfy him as to the colour of Willoughby's pointer than he could describe to her the shades of his mind. But who is he? Said Eleanor. Where did he come from? Has he a house at Allenham? On this point Sir John could give more certain intelligence, and he told them that Mr. Willoughby had no property of his own in the country, that he resided there only while he was visiting the old lady at Allenham Court, to whom he was related, and whose possessions he was to inherit, adding, yes, he is very well with catching, I can tell you, Miss Dashwood. He has a pretty little estate of his own, some in Somersetshire, besides. And if I were you, I would not give him up to my younger sister in spite of all his tumbling down hills. I would not give him up to my younger sister in spite of all this tumbling down hills. Miss Marianne must not expect to have all the men to herself. Brandon will be jealous if she does not take care. I do not believe, said Mrs. Dashwood with a good-humoured smile, that Mr. Willoughby will be incommoded by the attempts of either my daughters towards what you call catching him. It is not an employment to which they have been brought up. Men are very safe with us, let them be ever so rich. I am glad to find, however, from what you say, that he is a respectable young man, and one whose acquaintances will not be ineligible. He is a good sort of fellow, I believe, as ever lived, repeated Sir John. I remember last Christmas, at a little hop in the park, he danced from 8 o'clock till 4, without once sitting down. Did he indeed? Cried Marianne with sparkling eyes. And with elegance, with spirit? Yes, and he was up again at 8 to ride to the covert. There's a little one besides that, too. Covert. All these places that I don't know anymore. A thicket in which game can hide. Covert. He was out catching game, girl, after he was dancing up all night. That is what I like. That is what a young man ought to be. Whatever it be his pursuits, his eagerness in them should know no moderation and leave him no sense of fatigue. He should never get tired. Okay. I see how it will be, said Sir John. I see how it will be. You will be setting your cap at him now, and never think of poor Brandon. That is an expression, Sir John, said Marianne warmly, which I particularly dislike. I abhor every commonplace phrase by which wit is intended, and setting one's cap at men or making a conquest are both odious of all, are the most odious of all. Their tendencies are gross and illiberal. And if their construction could ever be deemed clever, time has long ago destroyed all its ingenuity. Sir John did not much understand this reproof, but he laughed as heartily as if he did, and then replied, You will make conquest enough, I dare say, one way or the other. She said, Ugh, making a conquest is gross. And he said, You're right. You're going to make a conquest. Okay. Poor Brandon. He is quite smitten already, and he is very well worth setting your cap at, I can tell you, in spite of all this tumbling about and spraining of ankles. Spelled Ancles. How long is this chapter? I like this book. This is a good book. I won't be swayed by any ratings. Next time, we're going to read chapter 10. Mr. freaking John Middleton is funny. And I love people who are like, I don't like it when you say make conquest or this. And they're like, well, you will make conquest and you are going to set your cap on him. And you're like, but I just said that sounds old. You sound old when you say that. But go for it. Do what you do, sir. Do whatever you're going to do. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening. hope this is as fun for you as it is for me. Go pick up a good book and read, but don't take my word for it. Ba-dum-bum. And happy reading, everybody. Ta-ta for now.